Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Prep Life. Just getting off the road, hanging out with Cam Hanes. Man, what an experience. I did the lift, run, shoot. If you're not familiar with it, it's part of his collective on his podcast as well as YouTube. Had an amazing time. When I found out I was going on it, I heard that there was this thing you had to do, like you had to carry this weight up a mountain. You lifted with them, and if you ran, you either ran up the mountain or you carried the rock, and then you shot bow with them. It was amazing, but it definitely exposed me to my weaknesses. When I heard I was going, I was kind of nervous, man. I was like, oh, man, I'm not in good enough shape. And you hear about people on social media that are influencers or famous, and you hear about them, and you're like, is that really true? I mean, Cam Hanes is 55 years old, and man, did he show me what he was made of. I mean, him running up that mountain, him lifting the weights, him shooting the bow, I was so impressed. And it made me better in a lot of ways. One, it identified a lot of weakness in my game, so it made me vulnerable. But Cam is such a good human being that he never makes you feel that way. You feel that way if you're checking yourself, but he never makes you feel that way. And so coming away from the experience in the podcast, I realized Cam Hanes, in a short period of time, made me better as a human being. And that's what he's really good at. I never really follow Cam Hanes. I've seen him hunting, and a lot of my friends are friends of his. But, man, I'm starting to follow what he does. I just picked up his book on Audible called Endure. It's his story of his life and some of the things he's been through. I'm like, man, what a stud and what a good human being. He doesn't live in some fancy, lavish home. He lives in the same house that his babies were raised in. He's got a small podcast studio, just real solid, down-to-earth human being. I don't know why he lives in Oregon. I mean, I know why, because the mountains and the trees. That's why I would live there. But the politics just don't align with him. He's just conservative, valued, and just a good human being, man. I'm appreciative of that experience. That podcast and that video of me getting shamed up that mountain, which I'm proud of, man. At least I did it. It's going to be available next week on his YouTube channel as well as his podcast, so make sure you go check it out. I want to say thanks to all the Patreon members that are supporting this. Patreon.com/Mike Glover. This podcast is sponsored by Patreon members and your support. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this. I want to talk about the 18 spot that we're in right now. We are in the top 25 on Amazon because of you with the book Prepared, a manual for surviving worst-case scenarios. Now, that's a big deal because it's like the way it segues is you have all these lists, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, but also Amazon does their own list, and we're in the top 25. David Goggins is right above us with his book, and we're at the 18th spot. I'm profoundly proud of that, but if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be there. So I want to say thank you for that. Also, the wait list for the app. We have a wait list. You go to fieldcraftsurvival.com. We already have the soft launch on the web version, but the app version drops in a few weeks. If you want to be part of that experience and you want to be tethered to the app, which takes you to like Samsung and Apple TV, make sure you hit up fieldcraftsurvival.com. Let's talk about the submarine that is sitting at the bottom of the ocean right now, 13,000 feet below, where 5 people are trapped in a submarine that can't be recovered. Here's what I think happened is it was like remote controlled and tethered, and then something happened and it got disconnected, whether from the RF signal or from the tethering rope. It's lost at sea. I'm going to read you the update because this is happening live in real time, and by the time you hear the next episode, we will know how this ends. Now, I posted this on my Instagram, and I posted it like black and white. This is what happened. This is the circumstance. And man, the dark humor comments, they're funny and super inappropriate, but it just tells you a lot about people's mindset today. I don't know the status of our mental health in our country when it comes to people out in society. I mean, you could look at the stats and suicide and drug overdose, et cetera, and it doesn't paint a pretty picture. But a good reflection of our empathy and the way we take things is based on the comments that I see every single day. I mean, people can't even post pictures of their dog without people saying something really silly. And some of it's silly, but some of it's really mean. And some of it's like inappropriate. And I don't want to be like the comment police, But it's like, come on, guys. Like, these people are fighting for their lives right now, and they're Americans. I mean, maybe we should have a little bit of empathy. And if you don't, like, dig deep, man. And I know people are going to comment about this and be like, and say something off the wall. But that's sad. I'll just say it that way. The missing Titanic sub search continues as banging sounds heard is the headline. As of right now, what we're covering is the U.S. Coast Guard said it has not identified the source of banging noises that were picked up by sonar Tuesday and Wednesday morning. The information has been shared with experts from the U.S. Navy as a search for the missing submersible continues. The air supply, less than a day of oxygen, may be left on the vessel. They're predicting 40 hours, and that's ticking by the hour. By the time you hear this, it's down to nearly a day's worth of oxygen, if at all. Now, the banging noise came at 30-minute intervals, which means it's likely man-made and is likely where the submarine is, but you're talking about 13,000 feet below the surface near the wreckage off the coast of America. 5 people, a British adventurer, a French diver, a Pakistani father and son who's a billionaire entrepreneur, and the founder of the company that operates the tour, according to social media post. The Coast Guard says as of 1:55 Eastern Time on June 21st, the operation to find missing submersible is 100% still a search and rescue mission. Coast Guard and other agencies assisting the effort to find a missing submersible are still conducting a search and rescue mission even as oxygen dwindles. This is 100% a search and rescue. We're smack dab in the middle of a search. We'll continue to put every available asset that we'll have at our disposal to find the Titan and the crew members. Captain Jamie Frederick, the response coordinator for the 1st Coast Guard District, said during a news conference. The team that is assisting the search efforts for the missing includes the Coast Guard, which is searching 900 miles off the coast of Cape Cod and 400 miles southeast of St. John's. Currently, 5 service assets are searching. There'll be a total of 10 service assets in the next 24 to 48 hours. There are 2 ROVs actively searching. Several more are en route and will arrive by tomorrow morning. And there are 2 back-to-back P3 flights. One is ongoing, which provides a total of 14 hours of continuous on-scene coverage. 2 C-130 flights, one ongoing now through the day and one into the evening. This is a very dire situation for these men. There's a whole bunch of things I want to talk about when it comes to this, but I'll keep this short. You know, preparation is key. Contingency plans are key. What happens in the worst case scenario? What happens in a plan? As we educate at Fieldcraft Survival, what happens in a plan is your first plan is going to go bad, and you have to have a contingency. What were these guys' contingency? What was their emergency and their PACE plan, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency? You know, I'm like, why don't they have a submersible that has like a balloon where something happens, they could inflate the balloons and it floats to the surface? Like, why did they not have a plan when things got disconnected and the power went out or whatever that was to be able to get to the surface? Because primarily the goal is to get to the surface. Like, the goal isn't to onboard as much oxygen as possible. That's like an afterthought because the goal should be as a priority, how do we get up to the surface? And they could have had multiple catastrophic failures. It's interesting to me, though, that they have so many intelligent people on this tour, including the man who runs the business, and they don't have these contingencies in place. But this is what happens, guys. I mean, these guys were touring the Titanic, which is at the bottom of the ocean, obviously, and this is the situation they ended up in. Super sad situation. We'll keep you guys updated. The Coast Guard has given the updates. If you want to go to any Google machine and type that in, you guys can see it. There have been sounds that have been picked up, and that just means that we'll continue to double down and figure out where the submersible is and how it can be brought to the surface. That's a big problem that people are saying. We could identify it, potentially locate it, and it's a needle in the haystack, but if we find that needle, how are we going to pull the needle through the haystack? And that's a big consideration right now, which obviously rescue efforts are ongoing. And I just pray for the people that are on board and hope they make it out alive. It'll be a harrowing story of survival, or it could be a tragic circumstance of not being prepared. Also, I want to talk about this. I just got this headline this morning. Pentagon accounting error provides extra $6.2 billion for Ukraine in military aid. I did a tweet on this recently where we talked about statistics. And recently, in the last couple of weeks, San Francisco has reported that a total of 74 people died on the streets of San Francisco from drug overdoses, 69 of the 74 from fentanyl. Now, if I was a foreign adversary and wanted to kill as many Americans as possible, I wouldn't go to war with that country. I would use a drug like fentanyl, migrate it from China, get it into Mexico cartel hands, and then blend it into everything we do because it makes it more addictive and potentially the dose could kill you. I mean, I just hanging out with Cam Haines and we were talking about a friend of a friend who was dealing with pain issues from not getting prescribed the right doses of pain prescription medicine and took a aftermarket, black market Percocet, and it was laced with fentanyl, and him and his wife died. They died. And that's super tragic, but that's happening all over this country. Last year's statistic was 100,000 Americans. It's likely going to be the leading cause of death for middle-aged men and will increase exponentially this year. 74 people died on the streets in San Francisco in 1 month, guys, 1 month, in May, 1 month. But we talk about mass shootings and mass killings. There's been around 80-something mass killings of victims that have died in the entire fiscal year from January to now. But what do we talk about as a narrative? We focus, hard focus on guns are the issue. Or is it mental health as a dilemma across the board? And is it bad policy when 74 Americans die in one city in America, in San Francisco, on the streets from drug overdoses? I mean, if you see the videos leaking out now, which they're leaking because the national media is not covering this, when you see these videos, it looks like the zombie apocalypse because people are completely out of their mind on different types of drugs. I think this whole Jordan Neely situation could have been prevented because the guy was arrested 44 prior times. He needed help by being in jail and getting help by getting off of drugs, but he wasn't. He was on drugs, and he was threatening people. And a gentleman who happened to be a former Marine tried to help the situation, and he winded up accidentally killing him, and they're going to charge that guy with murder. This is a sad state of circumstances. Pentagon accounting error provides $6.2 billion for Ukraine. I imagine a lot of people dealing with these issues in America would want to see that funding given to Americans. And I get it. The Ukrainian situation is a horrible one. But we have an accounting error with an extra $6.2 billion. Now, what I will say is a lot of people are inflating this like this is cash, but the Ukraine situation had nothing to do with cash and everything to do with equipment. The Pentagon said Tuesday that it overestimated the value of the weapons it had sent to Ukraine by $6.2 billion because that resulted in them designated the equipment as surplus. So what they said was the Pentagon spokesman, Sabrina Sin, said a detailed review of the accounting error found that the military services use replacement cost rather than the book value of the equipment that was pulled from the Pentagon and sent to Ukraine. She said final calculations show there was an error of $3.6 billion in the current fiscal year and $2.6 billion in 2022 fiscal year, which ended last September 30th. As a result, the department now has additional money in its coffers to support Ukraine as it pursues its counteroffensive against Russia. Insane. Like, yeah, but we're worried about your $600 payment on Venmo because the IRS is hiring 37,000 people to come after you. That's a problem. Recently, I got a note in the mail, and the note was from somebody who was a neighbor. I actually know who it is. If you're listening to this, I know who you are. She's an older lady who has been by my house several times, knocking on my door. One time because she saw my cow eating a piece of plastic, and she freaked out. When I opened my door and one of my guys was with me, she was in fight or flight. She was having a panic attack. And the letter wrote something like, how could you abuse your cow by keeping him in isolation? How horrible of you. And how could you slaughter him and leave his head on your front lawn? How heinous of you. Now, let me clarify, because I did tweet that out, and I wanted to give context to that. One, I raised the cattle on a 1/4 acre here in Heber City, Utah. It's a steer that has a life of about 18 months. Now, I extended his life by 3 months because of the brutal winter. And I wanted him to see grass because he was covered in snow for the majority of his life. We had a brutal winter, and it was devastating. She thought, based on her letter, that he should be provided shelter. One, I don't know if you know this, but no cattle in America have shelter. There are exceptions, like dairy cows, because the equipment that you use to milk one is underneath them, and you need to provide them adequate protection from the elements. But no cows in America that are grass-fed especially have shelter. And that's because they're an animal. They're livestock. So no shelter, not getting shelter. Two, the letter said I slaughtered him young. I didn't slaughter him young. I actually extended his life by 3 months. One, because I wanted to fatten him up. Two, I wanted him to see the grass and the sunshine, which he did. He died on a early spring morning. And I wanted to fatten him up with 50 pounds of grain. So he ate 50 pounds of grain a day for 60 days, plus half a bale of alfalfa and hay mix. That is a great life for a cow that's used to being in a cage. If you're eating factory farmed, whatever. So he had a great life. On the topic of the heinous act of slaughtering him and leaving his head on the front lawn, one, I personally didn't slaughter him. I would have, but I didn't have the equipment. Because to slaughter a 1,000+ pound animal, you need the proper equipment. So I called Heber Valley Meats, which has a truck that pulls up in front of your house that they put down the animal ethically, which they did. They shot him in the head and he fell to the ground. And they cut off his head and they hang him up and they cut him in half and quarter him to be able to start the process. That's what they did because he's an animal I intended to eat. Now, here's the difference between me and you and most Americans. Most Americans eat whatever they eat and don't think about what they're putting in their mouth. They don't think where it comes from. In fact, most people don't want to know where it comes from. So I asked this lady, I haven't personally asked her, but I asked this lady, do you eat out? And if you do, have you ever eaten meat out? Do you eat a steak? Do you eat chicken? Do you eat fish? If you do, have you ever inquired where that meat specifically comes from? Did you go and see the conditions where that meat was slaughtered? Likely not. Most of the meat that you eat in fast food restaurants especially are processed in factory farms. They don't get the life that my cattle got, that my steer Wagyu got. They don't get that life. They don't get a good life. And so before you judge me and take the time to write me a letter and put it in my mailbox telling me how you feel about my lifestyle, I would ask you to consider your lifestyle and then understand my lifestyle in the context of where I'm coming from. I want, when my kids eat, to know exactly where that meat came from. In fact, part of the life of my steer was those kids helping and assisting and feeding it. That is an important part of their life journey and that animal's life journey, because my family will eat that meat for a year. For that year, every time they break bread, they will understand where that food came from. And that's important. Not only for me to nutritionally know where the food came from, but for them to know ethically how that food was sourced, harvested, and killed. It's why I'm a hunter. It's why I advocate for hunting. It's why I had an amazing time listening to Cameron Hanes' book on this idea of hunters being the bad people, the bad guys. If you're a hunter, thank you for hunting and adding to conservation. If you're a hunter and you're not educating others to hunt, you should. And if you're not a hunter, you should give it a try. I'm going to be fishing. I'm going to be hunting. I'm going to be shooting upland and downland bird, because all of the food that I put in my body, that I put in my family's body, I want to know where it came from. So enough about that. I want to say thanks, guys, so much for being supporters of this channel, the Prepped Life channel. I continue to love and enjoy what I do every single day. It's why I do it. Follow my patreon.com/Mike Glover. Also, you could subscribe and hit the notification tab. And make sure, as always, you leave your feedback down below. Until next time, guys, peace out.